Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're analyzing a moment of absolute catastrophic strategic failure, a 9-day window in August 1945, where the fate of the Japanese Empire and potentially millions of lives really hinged on one essential question.
And that question is, when verifiable, undeniable facts contradict your deeply held ideology, which one wins?
It's a terrifying question. We're looking at what might be the most profound case study in institutional denial in modern history.
It really is. American intelligence, through intercepted military communications and later post-war analysis, recorded a leadership that had accurate, high-quality information in their hands.
Right.
Yet they consistently chose to reject reality right up until the point of national annihilation.
So our mission today for this deep dive is to trace this strategic denial across those 9 deadly days from August 6th to August 15th. We're going to be examining intercepted military transmissions, reconnaissance reports, basically all the data that was flowing into Tokyo.
And we're going to try and pinpoint the moments where they should have surrendered and, more importantly, understand why they didn't.
The core paradox here, and what we want you to think about as you listen, is this. Japan's Supreme War Council wasn't made up of fools. These were educated, well-informed military and political experts.
Absolutely. They knew the relative strengths of the Allies, they had the numbers, yet they constructed this psychological defense system so strong that they managed to convince themselves that the atomic bomb, an unprecedented reality-altering weapon, was nothing more than American propaganda.
And we get our first raw indicator of the scale of this catastrophe, the first sign of the chaos to come. Not from Tokyo, but from a small, sweltering decryption room on Tinian Island.
That's right. Specifically at 10:55 a.m. on August 6, 1945.
What happens then?
That's where Lieutenant Commander James Morrison, who was monitoring Japanese military frequencies, heard the pattern break. I mean, for years, he'd been listening to the rigid, formulaic rhythm of military communication.
Encrypted logistics, position updates, very predictable.
Yeah. Exactly. Careful, coded messages. But the transmission he intercepted from Hiroshima was different. It was frantic, desperate, and terrifyingly, it was transmitted in clear text.
No encryption.
No encryption, no protocols, just raw human panic pouring over the airwaves.
And what did that message actually say?
It was fractured, almost impossible to fully piece together. It said, violent, large, special-type bomb appearance of magnesium, entire district silence.
And then
it just cut out mid-sentence. That abrupt termination, that void of information following such a terrifying visceral description that set the immediate tone for the American analysts. They knew right away that something beyond conventional warfare had just occurred.
Even if Tokyo's leadership would spend the next 9 days trying to rationalize it away.
Precisely.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's dive right into the moment of impact and what you've called the physics of denial, right in the heart of the Japanese command structure.
To really understand their reaction, we need to set the internal scene. You have to contrast that raw, desperate intercept from Hiroshima with the controlled environment in Tokyo.
Right. They're not getting that raw feed. They're in a bunker.
They're in a massive, reinforced concrete war room, 90 feet beneath the Imperial Palace.
And the sources provide this fascinating, almost clinical detail about the temperature.
They do. Field Marshal Shunroku Hata, the Supreme Commander of the Second General Army, he insisted that the room temperature be maintained at precisely 68 degrees Fahrenheit.
20 degrees Celsius. Why?
Well, that detail tells you everything about their mindset. They genuinely believed that disciplined, controlled men made better decisions when they weren't sweating.
It's about maintaining an illusion of control.
It's all about control. They were trying to maintain this rhythm of, let's call it a managed decline. Their entire focus was on spiritual strength, on discipline, on honor as the key to overcoming America's staggering industrial might. They were prepared for attrition. They were not prepared for instant annihilation.
So this controlled bubble, this 68-degree room, is shattered at 8:16 a.m. when the bomb drops. It takes a few hours for the news to actually reach them.
Right. And when it does, it's Lieutenant Colonel Tishi Yamamoto who breaks protocol. He rushes in without the customary deep bow, holding the decoded transmission from Hiroshima Regional Military Command.
And what does this one say? Is it any clearer?
It's almost a carbon copy of the first panicked intercept. It says, entire city destroyed by single bomb blast radius exceeds all previous bombardment, unknown weapon type casualties, catastrophic request immediate. And just like the first one, it ends mid-word.
Signifying a total collapse of command on the ground.
Total collapse.
General Yoshiro Umezu, the chief of the Imperial General Staff, he immediately jumps to what seems like the most logical explanation, if you can call it that.
He jumped to a defense mechanism. He has to rationalize it. The idea of a city of 350,000 people, spanning 27 square miles, being destroyed by a single bomb just seemed mathematically impossible to him.
So what was his knee-jerk theory?
He argued it must have been a massive conventional raid. Maybe 500 B-29s deploying some new type of cluster bomb or chemical weapon all at once.
Because that was the only way his mind, which was, steeped in the logistics of conventional war, could process that scale of destruction.
Exactly. It had to be a numerical equation. It couldn't possibly be a qualitative scientific leap that they hadn't made themselves.
But the reality check was swift and brutal.
It was. Admiral Sumu Toyota, whose naval intelligence network was, frankly, excellent. They tracked every American carrier, every bombing run. He confirmed the reconnaissance data.
And the data showed.
Only 3 B-29 aircraft were tracked over Hiroshima that morning.
3?
3 planes, not 500. And honestly, that is the first moment the entire strategic framework should have just collapsed. That single fact, 3 planes, 1 city vaporized, it violated every known principle of warfare the Council had been operating under.
So if Admiral Toyota has the hard radar data, just 3 planes, why did everyone seem to rally around General Anami's denial? His claim that this was all just propaganda.
Because the ideology was stronger than the facts. The ideology was their strategic bedrock.
And General Nami was the voice of that ideology.
He was the Minister of War, the unyielding voice of the hardliners. And when the Supreme War Council finally convened at 2 p.m., he spoke first. He dismissed the reports out of hand. American propaganda. They want us to believe they possess weapons they do not have.
It was a psychological shield. He framed the catastrophe not as a military defeat, but as a sophisticated disinformation campaign.
He had to. He had to believe it was a lie, because if it was true, the entire foundation of their war doctrine just crumbled to dust.
Explain that doctrine. What was the core premise?
For 3 years, the Japanese military had operated on this ingrained belief that their industrial inferiority could be overcome by spiritual strength, by Bushido. Their entire strategy was attrition.
Right. Bleed the Americans dry.
Exactly. They believed they could inflict such ferocious, such high casualties on an invading American force that the political will in Washington, D.C. would just break. They thought they could force a negotiated, honorable peace.
And a single bomb demolishes that premise completely.
It does. I mean, if America can destroy a city with a single bomber, it means their scientific capacity has reached a level that renders all numerical resistance, all spiritual sacrifice, not just difficult, but completely meaningless.
It suggests America has been fighting this whole time with enormous capacity held in reserve.
Which is exactly what another officer later said. The strategy of attrition is moot. You can't bleed out an enemy who can erase your nation from the map, city by city, instantly.
And Colonel Hideaki Sato's analysis, which was presented later that afternoon around 4 p.m., it backed this all up with cold, hard math.
The numbers are just staggering. Sato detailed America's production superiority. I'm talking 88,410 tanks produced by the U.S. versus Japan's 6,550.
An unbelievable gap.
And it gets worse. America had 41 fleet aircraft carriers, Japan had 15. The numbers were already disastrously skewed in the conventional war.
So after the Hiroshima report, Sato had to revise his whole conclusion for his superiors.
And his new conclusion was utterly fatalistic. He basically said, if the Americans can destroy entire cities with single bombs, then they possess scientific capabilities that render numerical comparisons meaningless.
They are not fighting the same war we are fighting.
That's the key line. The data confirmed that all their previous strategic calculations were instantly obsolete. And Foreign Minister Togo, the diplomat who was trying to find a way out, he tried to leverage this. He said, if they have one, they have more. We have to surrender.
But the majority just couldn't accept it.
They resisted the logic, driven by this deep-seated fear of unconditional surrender.
So the initial reports, the reality of the 3 planes, it all created this logical paradox they couldn't solve. The next step, then, was to codify the denial. They had to actually manufacture an alternative explanation.
Right. The leadership couldn't function while holding these 2 competing truths in their heads, one of fighting with honor and one of total annihilation. So within 3 hours of the initial reports, Anami's air defense staff provided the strategic comfort they craved. They gave them the comfortable lie.
And what specifically was in that assessment that allowed them to, intellectually continue the war?
It was a very clinical denial. They issued an official assessment claiming the Hiroshima incident was, quote, consistent with massive incendiary raid, estimated 400 to 500 B-29 aircraft deploying new cluster bomb configuration.
So they just forced the event back into a pattern they understood.
Exactly. Like the massive firebombing of Tokyo, which killed 100,000 civilians. By doing that, they could label it a tragedy, but a comprehensible tragedy. It was just chemistry and fire, not physics and fission.
But this comfortable lie didn't last very long. It was pretty quickly confronted by the undeniable visual horror of the photographic evidence.
That arrived at 6 p.m. on August 6th. And you have to remember, Lieutenant Tatsuo Yokoyama, the chief photo analyst, was a veteran. He'd processed thousands of reconnaissance images. He knew what massive conventional destruction looked like.
Scattered fires, multiple craters, debris fields.
Right. The Hiroshima images defied everything he knew about war.
So how specifically did the photographs scientifically disprove the massive incendiary raid theory?
Well, they showed absence, not just destruction. There was a perfect circular zone of total obliteration extending 2 miles from a single, defined ground zero point. There were no multiple craters, no scattered ignition points. It was clean.
And Yokoyama did the math.
He did. Using standard military analysis, he calculated that to generate that radius of destruction conventionally would have required roughly 2,000 tons of incendiaries.
Which is the payload of.
About 200 B-29s.
And they tracked 3.
They tracked 3. The mathematical inconsistency was just screamingly obvious from the photos alone.
And the material evidence on the ground, the things in the photos, also spoke to impossible temperatures and pressures, right?
Absolutely. Steel-reinforced concrete buildings hadn't collapsed inward like they would from a conventional bomb. They had been vaporized or twisted into these impossible shapes by a massive, sudden outward pressure wave. The thermal signature was unlike anything they'd ever seen. But the detail that truly haunted the Japanese analysts and later the Americans who found their reports was the human shadows burned into concrete walls.
That detail is just a chilling marker of the physics involved.
It's the ultimate visual proof of nuclear fission. The thermal flash was instantaneous and unbelievably intense, brighter than 1,000 suns, as one eyewitness put it. It hit the surface of the city, and anyone standing outside instantly shielded the surface behind them from that energy.
So before their physical forms ceased to exist.
They left a permanent dark silhouette branded onto the concrete or stone behind them. This is the thermal energy released from the instant conversion of matter into energy. You cannot explain that with any kind of combustion theory.
So while Tokyo is trying to argue away physics, let's check back in with the American intelligence analysts on Tinian. What are they hearing as Tokyo escalates its denial?
They're just listening to the confusion ramp up through the intercepted communications. The pattern showed the Japanese command trying again and again to fit a nuclear event into a conventional box.
So you hear things like,
At 8:30 a.m., they're reporting multiple fires. By 10:45 a.m., communication severed. Then at 2 p.m., city appears destroyed, must be an error.
must be an error.
It's pure denial. And Dr. Philip Morrison, a key physicist from the Manhattan Project who's attached to the intelligence team, he recognized this intellectual roadblock immediately. He knew exactly what they were trying to do.
And he articulated the problem perfectly in a briefing note.
He did. He wrote, they think it's chemistry. They're trying to explain nuclear fission with combustion theory. It's like trying to explain electricity with the theory of fire.
The Japanese were trying to apply known 1940 science to a phenomenon that completely violated those principles.
Right. Their entire strategic framework was based on chemical explosives. This was based on a level of physics they had tried and failed to master.
And this intellectual roadblock had a direct strategic consequence, as Captain Parsons, another member of the team, pointed out.
Precisely. Parsons summarized the danger of this in a classified memo. He said, "You can't capitulate to a weapon you think is propaganda."
Because if the War Council believes it's just a sophisticated bluff, a big conventional raid, then they have every reason to keep fighting.
Exactly. To endure the bluff. Their denial of the physics ensured their refusal to surrender.
So, back in the bunker, evening of August 6th, Admiral Toyota displays these damning photographs, and the response from Anami is to, what? Create an official committee to keep the lie going.
That's basically it. He demanded scientific proof that Hiroshima was destroyed by an A-bomb before he would even consider a change in strategy.
And Prime Minister Suzuki, the civilian leader who secretly wanted peace, he let him do it.
Suzuki understood that Anami was just buying time to maintain the illusion that they could still fight. So Suzuki allowed the formation of the committee, but the directive they were given was fatally flawed from the start.
What was the critical flaw in their mission?
The committee was titled the Atomic Bomb Countermeasures Committee, and it was led by Dr. Yoshio Nishina, who was Japan's foremost nuclear physicist. But crucially, the directive tasked them with providing a scientific assessment to reassure the Supreme War Council, not to determine the objective truth.
So they were sent out with a confirmation bias baked into their orders.
Completely. As one intercepted communication suggested, they were looking for permission to keep fighting, not a reason to stop.
The choice of Dr. Yoshio Nishina to lead this denial committee is, well, it's deeply ironic given his background. He was probably the worst possible person you could pick to lead a scientific whitewash.
He was a brilliant mind, a student of Niels Bohr, and, most importantly, he had led Japan's own unsuccessful attempt at developing a nuclear weapon.
So he knew the theory.
He knew the theory. He knew the complex engineering, the isotope separation challenges. He knew what America must have achieved, because he knew exactly where his own team had failed. Yeah. He wasn't going to be easily fooled.
So Nishina gets this directive on August 7th. He packs a few scientific instruments and begins this 16-hour journey to Hiroshima. It must have been a profoundly personal journey of scientific defeat for him.
You have to imagine it was an immersion into the grotesque. When he arrived on the outskirts of the city at dawn on August 8th, he noted the environmental factors immediately. The air was thick, metallic. It tasted of ozone and copper.
A strange, unnatural heat.
A bizarre residual heat across the landscape and just absolute eerie silence where a major metropolitan center should have been.
And what was the definitive proof he found when he reached ground zero?
He walked toward the epicenter. He saw the material steel vaporized, stone cracked and fused. He saw the blast damage radiating outward uniformly from a single point, which is only consistent with an airburst of immense power. And then he knelt at the concrete steps of the Sumitomo Bank.
Where he saw the shadow.
He saw the perfect, permanent shadow of a man burned into the stone. He didn't need complicated instruments at that point. He felt the residual heat. He saw the perfection of the blast radius.
And in that moment, he understood it. The instant conversion of matter into energy. He knew it was nuclear fission.
Yeah, he did. His private conclusion, which he recorded in a letter to a scientific colleague, it just captures his profound despair and his sense of professional dishonor. He wrote, "If the Americans have successfully developed an atomic weapon, then we and our entire team should commit harakiri."
Wow.
He said, "We have been exceeded in scientific character." He was sent to provide reassurance, and he returned having confirmed total scientific and strategic defeat.
And yet, when he presented these undeniable findings, the committee refused to accept them. This wasn't ignorance anymore. This was active, deliberate intellectual sabotage.
It was pure manufactured skepticism, led by a Colonel Seo Arisu. Nishina's findings were immediately dismissed. Every single piece of data was countered with some flimsy, conventional explanation.
So the radiation readings.
They claimed it was a dirty bomb, a conventional explosive laced with radioactive dust, not proof of fission.
The blast pattern.
Coordinated demolitions, maybe by saboteurs on the ground. The photographs, the shadows, all fabricated or exaggerated by American psychological warfare.
So the final official report confirmed the denial, which American intelligence then picked up.
Right, and the intercepted phrase from that report was chilling. It said, "Evidence insufficient to confirm atomic weapon deployment."
So the highest levels of the Japanese military were actively suppressing the truth, confirmed by their own top scientist.
And throughout August 8th, military communications continued to stress no change to operational planning and maintain the official line that the American claims were psychological warfare. They were still absolutely determined to fight.
But while Tokyo was debating the physics of one bomb, the strategic landscape was collapsing on a completely different front.
Diplomacy, yes. Foreign Minister Togo had staked all of their remaining hopes on Soviet mediation, relying on that 1941 neutrality pact they had with Stalin.
This was the ultimate blind spot, wasn't it? They were so focused on the Pacific War, they completely missed the massive threat looming in the West.
They believed Stalin would mediate a conditional peace for them, something that would allow them to preserve the imperial institution, maybe some regional sovereignty. They were tragically mistaken.
On the evening of August 8th, the Japanese ambassador, Naotake Sato, is urgently summoned to the Kremlin.
He arrives at midnight, expecting a lengthy diplomatic negotiation. Instead, the Soviet foreign minister, Vyacheslav Molotov, delivers a message that lasts less than 30 seconds.
And that message was?
The Soviet Union considers itself in a state of war with Japan as of August 9th, 1945.
The diplomatic back door just slammed shut.
Instantly, and within hours, 1.5 million Soviet troops invaded Manchuria, systematically destroying the Kwantung Army, which is Japan's elite fighting force.
So on the morning of August 9th, the Supreme War Council convenes an emergency session at 10:30 a.m. But they're meeting to discuss the Soviet invasion, not Hiroshima.
It's not at all. General Anami, still clinging to his denial about the atomic bomb, he steers the entire conversation toward the Soviets. He argues that the loss of Manchuria means they have to immediately begin the final defense of the home islands.
He's still arguing they need to make the Americans and the Soviets pay for every inch.
His belief, which he states, is that they simply can't have an unlimited supply of this special type bomb. He thinks Hiroshima was a one-off.
But the meeting was interrupted. At the very moment they were arguing about the Soviets, reality delivered a second undeniable blow.
It did. A junior officer entered the underground chamber, his face described as ash gray in the dim light. He managed to force out one word.
Nagasaki.
Sir, Nagasaki.
The second atomic bomb detonated at 11:02 a.m. on August 9th.
This was the point of no return. It proved absolutely and irrevocably that the first bomb was not a bluff, not a single miracle weapon, but a technological capacity they had completely underestimated. The intercepted reports coming into Tinian immediately shifted from confusion to just raw terror.
Second special type bomb confirmed over Nagasaki. Request immediate instructions. We have no defensive measures.
Dr. Morrison noted the sheer, undiluted panic in the Japanese operational transmissions after that.
Yeah, even with two cities destroyed and the Soviets attacking, the institutional denial, the paralysis, it persisted.
It is the ultimate reflection of a strategic failure rooted in ideology. Despite the undeniable fear, the obliteration of a second city, subsequent military communications immediately stressed that the fighting spirit of imperial forces remains undiminished. The Supreme War Council was just paralyzed.
3 members for surrender, 3 against.
Right. 3 members recognized that national suicide was imminent, but 3 Anami and the military hardliners still believed that death with honor was preferable to unconditional surrender.
The arguments raged throughout the afternoon and evening of August 9th, stretching past midnight. It was pride versus survival, honor versus mathematics. The council achieved a complete, dangerous paralysis.
And the consequence of this paralysis was a plan they were fully prepared to execute. Operation Kitsugo.
Kitsugo was the military hardliners' defense plan, and it represents the ultimate cost of this strategic denial. I mean, it wasn't a military strategy, was it? It was systematic and national suicide.
That's exactly what it was. It was built on the premise that they could still inflict enough terror to somehow force a negotiation.
Let's detail the horror of Kitsugo, because this really underscores what the leaders were willing to sacrifice to maintain their political position and their doctrine of honor.
Kitsugo meant the total mobilization of every single resource, human and material, for the defense of the home islands. It transformed Japan into a nation of suicide fighters.
Schools were already being converted into weapons factories.
Yes, and children as young as 12 were being trained and issued explosives to throw themselves under American tanks. Women were training with sharpened bamboo spears to charge landing forces. It was mass organized sacrifice on a scale that's hard to comprehend.
And what were the accepted casualty estimates for this plan? The ones the Japanese military itself was working with.
The captured estimates are just shocking. They range from 5 to 10 million civilian deaths. And you have to understand, this wasn't the worst-case scenario. This was the accepted price of failure.
Total annihilation was deemed preferable to the humiliation of unconditional surrender.
They were willing to sacrifice millions of their own people to protect an ideology when all available intelligence, all the facts on the ground confirmed the war was completely lost.
So Prime Minister Suzuki, seeing this deadlock continue into the early hours of August 10th, he understands that they are hours away from either the next atomic bomb or the mass slaughter of Kitsugo.
At 2 a.m., he makes a move that breaks all political and military precedent.
He proposes they seek the emperor's sacred judgment.
It was a master stroke of political maneuvering. The emperor, Hirohito, was seen as a divine figure above the political disputes of the council. By invoking his judgment, Suzuki forced the hardliners into an impossible position.
They couldn't argue against the emperor without appearing to question his divinity and his authority. The emperor enters the underground conference room at 2:30 a.m. The atmosphere must have been almost unbearable.
Hirohito had spent the preceding hours reading all the reports, synthesizing the information from Nishina, reviewing the civilian casualty estimates for Kitsugo, and really contemplating the absolute extinction of his lineage and his people. He listened to the arguments for fighting on, but when he spoke, the political debate was over.
And what was the crucial line that shifted the entire dynamic away from this idea of honor and toward simple survival?
He addressed the arguments directly. He cited the reports from Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the catastrophic casualty estimates for the home defense. And then he said, continuing the war means the annihilation of the Japanese people. The enemy possesses weapons against which we have no defense.
Then came the line that changed everything.
If we persist, we will not die with honor. We will simply cease to exist as a nation.
We will simply cease to exist as a nation. I mean, that one sentence just redefines the stakes. It's no longer about tactical defeat. It's about existential obliteration.
It is. And the emperor issued the final order. The unendurable must be endured. The unbearable must be borne. I order the government to accept the Potsdam Declaration and surrender. The only condition he pleaded for was the preservation of the imperial institution itself.
But even after the emperor's sacred order, the terminal delusion of the military hardliners didn't just vanish. Within hours, American intelligence intercepted fragments of a final, desperate conspiracy.
This was the final, tragic act of denial. Major Kenji Hatanaka and a group of hardline officers refused to believe the emperor's decision was genuine. They actually plotted a military coup to seize the imperial palace.
Because they believed Hirohito had been misled by defeatist civilian advisors.
Their plan was to find and destroy the recording of the emperor's surrender broadcast, imprison the peace faction, and force a continuation of Operation Kitsuga.
The intercepted communications from that night must have been chaotic. What were the American analysts hearing?
They were picking up frantic, fragmented orders. Things like, palace security can be overcome. Destroy the broadcast equipment before transmission. The emperor must be protected from defeatist advisors.
These men were planning a coup to prevent surrender, even after 2 atomic bombs and a direct imperial decree.
It shows you that for a critical mass of the military, the ideology was literally more important than the god emperor they had sworn to serve.
The coup ultimately failed. Hatanaka couldn't find the recording and, in despair, committed suicide outside the palace gates.
And at noon, August 15th, the emperor's voice was broadcast across the airwaves. He explained the decision, using the language of necessity and tragedy. The enemy has begun to employ a new and most cruel bomb. For American intelligence, the end was marked not by a military victory parade, but by the profound silence that followed.
Japanese military communications, which had raged with denial and defiance for 9 days, just ceased.
They went silent.
So the war was finally over, but the huge question remained, why? Why did a highly structured, well-resourced command structure allow this strategic paralysis to happen? The answer really came later, through the investigations of the Allied Translator and Interpreter Service.
Right. In September 1945, a team led by Colonel Sidney Mashbeer entered Tokyo to retrieve and translate Japanese military and government records. Their initial expectation was that Japan had simply underestimated American capacity because of poor intelligence.
But the shocking discovery they made fundamentally changed the understanding of Japan's strategic failure. The intelligence wasn't poor at all.
It was the opposite. It was painfully, remarkably accurate.
It's almost forensic in its precision, from what I've read.
It was. Reports going all the way back to 1941 correctly estimated American industrial capacity, steel production, aircraft manufacturing, shipbuilding with figures that matched or were within a few percentage points of the actual American production totals. They knew exactly how much the U.S. could produce.
And there's that incredible specific example from 1943.
Yes. A 1943 intelligence document accurately predicted the U.S. would produce over 90,000 aircraft that year. The actual number was 85,000. Japanese naval intelligence tracked American carrier construction so precisely they could anticipate the launch date and deployment of virtually every major warship.
Right, so they knew all along. They had the numbers, the intelligence existed, the data was sound, the analysis was correct, but the leadership chose not to believe it.
It suggests a massive internalized failure, not an external informational one. It wasn't a failure of collection. It was a failure of acceptance.
The data just conflicted too violently with their deeply held ideology.
Exactly. The ideology that spiritual strength would ultimately overcome industrial might. They substituted what they wanted to be true, that America was brittle and fatigued, for what was demonstrably true, that America was an industrial behemoth that was just getting started.
And the subsequent interrogations of high-ranking officials confirmed this devastating psychological disconnect.
General Torishiro Kowabe, who was the deputy chief of the Army General Staff, he provided Mashbeer's team with a brutally honest self-assessment.
His testimony is often cited as the definitive explanation for the delusion.
It is. He stated, We convinced ourselves that courage could overcome industrial capacity, that fighting spirit would triumph over material superiority. We confused what we wanted to be true with what was actually true. He admitted the facts were there, but they were simply too painful to integrate into their strategy.
Another officer provided an insight that truly highlights the hubris of the Japanese strategy and why the two atomic bombs came as such a profound shock.
He did. He noted that the Japanese military constantly underestimated the enemy's reserve capacity and scientific depth. He said, "We saw their factories, their fleets, their armies, and told ourselves these represented their maximum effort. We didn't comprehend that America was fighting this war with one hand behind its back."
They viewed the colossal U.S. effort as a sign of strain, not a reflection of a capability that could still produce entirely new city-killing weapons while fighting a global war.
And even Dr. Nishina, the brilliant physicist who confirmed the bomb's reality, were shocked when he later saw the full scale of the Manhattan Project.
His shock was physical, right?
It was. He realized the Americans had committed $2 billion, hundreds of thousands of workers, and built entire secret cities dedicated solely to building two bombs, all while fighting a global war. Nishida's reflection on it was so sobering. He said, "We attempted something similar with 500 scientists and a budget that couldn't purchase a single B-29 bomber."
It was a scientific and logistical gulf that just defied their comprehension.
It did.
Which brings us to the final necessary comparison that must be made, which really defines the true horror of the denial we've been studying across these 9 days.
The contrast is stark. The death toll of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, while a terrible human tragedy, killed an estimated 150,000 to 246,000 people. The alternative, the path chosen by the leaders consumed by ideology, Operation Ketsugo, would have guaranteed millions of deaths.
Millions. We're talking about those 5 to 10 million civilian deaths that were accepted by the military planning staff.
Yes, and the insight here is brutal. The bombs were an instrument of unimaginable destruction, but the alternative, the military leadership's chosen path of delusion and ideological purity, would have been exponentially more apocalyptic. It would have led to the complete annihilation of the Japanese people as a defined cultural and political entity.
So the bombs, as terrible as they were, forced an end to a greater self-imposed catastrophe.
In a way, yes.
Colonel Mashbeer's classified conclusion, based on all these intercepts and interrogations, it summarized the universal error. He moved beyond the specifics of the war and really articulated a human truth.
He wrote that the true danger isn't technical or material, but the human capacity for self-delusion. He concluded that the Japanese leadership had accurate intelligence, clear analysis, and scientific confirmation that resistance was futile, yet they ignored all of it. They ignored it in favor of ideology, honor, and wishful thinking.
The war was prolonged not by a lack of information, but by an active rejection of uncomfortable facts.
That's the core of it.
So this deep dive into the 9 days between August 6th and August 15th, 1945, it really shows us a critical moment where military leaders chose ideology over physics, forcing the emperor to intervene and literally order his nation to survive.
It's a powerful, powerful lesson in institutional blindness. The military had a narrative. Spiritual strength overcomes material might. And they were so deeply invested in that narrative that they couldn't see the reality staring them in the face. Not until a second city was obliterated and the emperor issued a direct divine command.
When you visit Hiroshima's Peace Memorial Park, there's a stone cenotaph, and it's inscribed with a deliberately ambiguous phrase that still haunts those who read it. It says, "Please rest in peace, for the error will not be repeated."
And we understand now that the ambiguity is the entire point. The error wasn't only the use of the bomb. The error, which is confirmed by all those intercepted communications and post-war analysis, was the fatal human tendency to believe comfortable, honorable lies over undeniable, uncomfortable truths.
It was the error of prioritizing a cherished but obsolete strategic doctrine over existential reality.
Exactly.
And that profound lesson brings us to our final thought for you today. We've seen how deeply ingrained identity and strategic doctrine can override even the most precise intelligence data when it threatens the core beliefs of a leadership structure.
So if the Japanese Supreme War Council, facing the complete annihilation of their nation, could ignore objective facts simply because they contradicted a belief they desperately wanted to be true, that honor demanded fighting on, we have to ask ourselves, what uncomfortable truths are you ignoring today? In your own life, your business strategy, or your long-term planning, what are you ignoring simply because it contradicts a belief you desperately want to hold on to? That capacity for strategic self-delusion, that remains the most persistent danger of all.